Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome here in the Blauwe Zaal. Welcome to the program Capturing Climate Change, the first lunch program of Studium Generale here in the new quartal, and also the first under the new Corona guidelines. So we are with a somewhat smaller group than usual, but nothing we're not really used to by now. So it's really nice to see you all here today, and of course, the more opportunity for you to ask your questions to today's guest. If everything else goes according to plan, next week Studium Generale will once again be hosting the World Press Photo Exhibition. It's a unique exhibition. It travels all around the world and it showcases the most intriguing, most exceptional press photos of, in this case, 2021. And as Studium Generale, we're very happy to be able to host this because we think what makes this exposition unique is the fact that it shows stories that are not always heard, and it does so in such a way that it leaves no one untouched. It's not an exposition that you walk by without noticing. The images are sometimes emotional, they are confrontational, yeah, they are revealing. And it's interesting to know as well that these images are shown all around the world, also in places where sometimes what they show is controversial or even not considered legal. And as a prelude to the exposition, we have invited someone today who is also a multiple winner of World Press Photo Award, and also someone, I think, who sheds light on stories that are often untold. Photojournalist Kadir van Lohuizen. He works based in Amsterdam, but works very internationally, and he is perhaps best known for his long-running projects on environmental issues, for example, related to waste, which is for what he won the World Press Photo in 2018, which deals with the way that megacities mishandle their waste. And he also has projects, for example, about the rise of sea levels. And here you see his latest work, After Us, the Deluge, that we will be discussing today as well. Yeah, I think without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kadir van Lohuizen. Kadir, welcome here
Hello.
in Eindhoven.
Yes, thank you.
Going through your work, I noticed that you must be a person who really likes to travel around the world. It seems like you have visited the most remote places. How has Corona life been treating you so far?
Well, that was a pretty hard reset for me, I think for many, but for me, yeah, for the last 30 years I've been traveling and I was always away for 7-8 months a year.
Right.
So I actually came back a few days ago from Tanzania. That was the first trip since March last year. So yeah, I mean, traveling is great, obviously, but traveling also means that I'm working. So I had to reset myself, and I'm working in the Netherlands now so far. Yeah.
And have you refound your respect for the Netherlands in that way, or?
I knew it pretty well, but I know it now even much better. I'm investigating. Basically, it's a visual research into our food systems.
Okay.
So, and as you probably know, although we are a tiny country, we are the second food exporter in the world after the US. So, well, we know all the discussions, especially here in this province. So it's yeah, it's very difficult, but it's very interesting.
Okay, so at least in your close surroundings, there are also stories to find.
I discovered so. Yes, you don't have to travel to the other side of the world.
Well, that's nice to know.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about your work After Us, the Deluge, but we also invited you in celebration of the World Press Exposition.
Yeah.
It's an exposition that you also have many links to, not only as a winner, but you were also a jury member for several years and a member of the board. Can I ask you, first of all, what struck you most about this year's exposition?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest, because, you know, I mean, what I just said, that I couldn't travel was the case for many of my colleagues. So I expected that there would be less stories. and that most stories would be related to Corona. But it's actually very diverse, and what I'm very pleased to see is actually that much more than before, the stories are produced by local photographers.
Okay.
So it's not the white guy who went to the other side of the world, but it's often produced local now, and that has been changing over the years, and I think it's a good development, yeah, it obviously addresses local representation as well.
Do you see different topics come up now that the photographers are more local?
Yeah, I think people are much better trained, and I was in Tanzania actually because I conducted training for 8 young photographers, 4 from Tanzania, 4 from Kenya, and it was a training to how to visualize climate stories actually, and you know, it's better if they do it instead of me, especially if you talk about the climate. You are kind of depending on the weather or on the storms or the rain season. So if you're coming from far away, it's not always possible to do this.
Yeah.
So, but I'm happy to be here. I have a history here because the last time in this room was when my dad became professor here at the university.
Okay, wow.
So the last time I was here was in 1975. I was smaller than all you.
I was going to say, not many people born then.
No, I was 12.
So there's a link to technology in your family.
Yeah, my dad was a city planner. So yeah, I'm coming from a family who deals with how to plan the landscape, which is kind of relevant in these stories.
Yeah, do you see elements of that come back in your work as well?
Well, I think so. You know, I mean, especially if you talk about this story, which is about the consequences of a rising sea level. That, you know, I mean, we live in a very well protected delta, but I think the way we are building now and where we are planning our new towns or cities is maybe not taking into account what's going to happen in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, before we get into that, I was also curious to hear, because of course you have decades of experience in photojournalism. Do you observe, what kind of changes have you observed, for example, related to the World Press in more recent years?
Well, you know, when I started photography, it was analog, so there was no digital camera. There was no internet. There was no mobile phones. So I'm really puzzled how we did it that back in the day. So the arrival of the digital cameras was quite a revolution. I wasn't very happy in the beginning.
Why not?
Well, because I was mainly photographing in black and white. So to process your own films and print your own pictures was a craft in itself. So that got lost a little bit.
Is it something you still do, or?
Sometimes, and I heard that people studying photography, that it's quite a hype now, that it's coming back.
As the cassette tape and the as the cassette tape, like
as the cassette tape and the vinyl.
The vinyl.
So it's interesting to see that there's a revival.
Maybe interesting. Are there any photography lovers in the room? People who, I see a few hands. Anyone doing analog as well? Yeah? Okay, yeah.
I mean, obviously the big change, because the end of photography was very often predicted, because it would have been taken over by film, by video.
At the end of photography itself?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, it was predicted several times. But obviously the opposite happened, is that everybody became a photographer, because I think that everybody has a camera in their pocket. And that's new.
Yeah. And how has that affected your field of work, the photojournalism?
Well, I think it's, I mean, many of my colleagues, they were kind of worried, because, they saw that that they felt threatened. That since everybody has a camera, that it's difficult to work. But there's a difference of taking a picture and being a good journalist. So you know, and that's a difference. And I think it's okay because it's weird because you know there's almost nothing happening in this world which is not recorded.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be sometimes appreciated as well, because I think we all saw these incredible, terrible images of Kabul airport when people were trying to get out. That was actually done by people who had a phone.
Yeah.
If people wouldn't have had a phone, we would have never seen those images. And I think they are necessary for us to see. I mean, we can discuss how the world responded to that, but at least it's documented.
And this was documented, I guess, also by locals or by...
Yeah, and I don't think they were photographers.
No.
You know, I think it was people in the crowd. It was people themselves who were trying to get out. That made them probably even more intense, because you really felt you were in the midst of it.
So how do you still stand out from that as a professional photographer then?
Well, you know, I'm a visual storyteller. Okay. So, you know, I mean, that's still an art and a profession, that you know how to tell stories, how to build them, how to do your research, how to do your fact checking, how to edit, and their journalistic ethics. There's values, you know, you have to observe. So that makes it into a profession, and yeah.
And is it something you observe? And I don't know how World Press is it open to everyone or to?
No, you have to be to submit. You have to be a professional photographer. It's sometimes difficult for them to check because they get this incredible amount of submissions. So it's sometimes difficult to check for them if somebody is professional or not. But there's a first round and a second round. So the first round jury, they make the big, they clean it up, so to speak. There's like about 100,000 images they have to go through, and then
that's what you've done as a jury member also.
Yeah, which is incredible. You know, I mean, and sometimes a bit worrying, because it basically means that you see every image for, I think, 2 seconds, and you have to judge. And you don't get any other information. You don't get a caption. You don't know where it is. You can only guess. So.
Okay, so that's really looking at the photograph itself and not.
It's looking at the photograph, and obviously all the jury members are professionals. So you know you usually know where it was taken or what the event or the moment was. But obviously, often not. Sometimes not.
And then it's your.
So mistakes are being made. You know, it is true that some images didn't make it to the next round, which maybe should have been a winner.
That's a if you're on such a tight time frame.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you end up.
But it's the only way that it's doable. Otherwise, it's just impossible.
And would you say it's fair that someone who filmed the situation in Kabul as a layperson?
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, we had discussions when I was in the Supervisory Board that how to deal with let's say, citizen journalism.
Yeah.
So images which are not taken by a professional, if they could still be recognized. So there's a possibility there. I mean, maybe you remember there was this famous image of this prison in Iraq, where this Iraqi was standing on a box, and he looked like with a cap over his head, and American soldiers, they put wires on his hands, and he was standing like this if he would be electrocuted.
Okay.
And that became a symbol of the cruelty of the Americans in Iraq. So that was awarded, actually, was recognized.
Okay, that was taken by...
Yeah, because it's, you know, there are iconic images in history. and they are often taken by professionals, but sometimes not. And they still stand out. They stand out to a general audience. So I can imagine that one of those images, although I think the strengths from what we saw from Kabul, it was actually film. You know, when you remember when the plane was taking off and all these people were trying to
when they were kind of clinging on. And
I mean, that was just incredible.
And that's also part of this year, or?
No, because this year is still coming up for the World Press.
Okay, yeah, of course. Yeah. And talking about the role of photojournalism as a profession, there's been discussion, at least the last years, but maybe also before that, it's under threat, both in terms of personal safety and in a financial capacity.
Yeah, I mean, it's never been easy. You know, I think it's one of the few since I became a professional, I've only seen the budgets going down.
Yeah, because newspapers get smaller.
It's one of the very few professions in the world where over the last 20 years you start to earn less instead of more. But yeah, I mean, I covered a lot of conflicts. I've been in Afghanistan and Iraq. I covered a lot of African conflicts, and it is more dangerous, I would say, than before. Because before you were kind of respected as a journalist. You were kind of seen as a neutral person. And now you're often, you are a target, either for ransom or for political reasons. You can get kidnapped or, you know, I mean, it is sometimes very unsafe. So.
Yeah. Have you made personal decisions as well not to go, for example?
Well, if I think about my history and what I did in the early years, I was maybe a bit crazy. I think
you took more risks.
I took risks which I wouldn't take today, and that's maybe because you feel that I don't know, that you're untouchable, you know, you start to realize if you get older, but especially you start to realize if you start to lose colleagues because they were killed.
That has happened to you as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I lost quite a few colleagues. So that probably made me more careful, and also I discovered that it has a mental effect, obviously. So I'm a bit more careful and a bit more cautious, and so many of my stories are now related to the environment and to the climate crisis, which is just as important to be covered.
Yeah. And is it something you see in World Press as well, that maybe also younger photographers are less inclined to, or that they have to take more risks?
No, I think, you know, I mean, the problem is sometimes that especially if you are assigned by a magazine or a newspaper, that the magazine or the newspaper should take care of you. And there has been cases that they have been hiring local professionals and didn't insure them, for example. So... you know, in that sense, World Press has a mission. You know, it's not just a contest. You know, it's also to protect and to educate. And the exhibition, which you will see next week, is it's spectacular because it travels to so many countries. Mm-hmm. So it travels to, you know, you can see it in Tehran. So. You know, I mean, and often people otherwise they wouldn't have seen those images.
Because can countries put restrictions on the exhibition?
No, they cannot. So the rule in World Press Photo is that they will not censor. But it's difficult sometimes because you know, there are always sensitive stories which are maybe not liked by the specific country which they are shown in. Yeah. So if it's shown in Russia and there's the whole story about Navalny and all the protests, it's complicated. But if a country or a government insists that something is being taken out, they will take down the whole exhibition.
That's what World Press does in that case?
Yeah.
Okay.
They will not take anything out. But I mean, I was in Algeria a few years ago. It was opening in Algiers, the capital. And it was all fine and dandy. And then in the last moment, the day it was opening, the Minister of Information said that a certain story had to be taken out, which was about prostitution in St. Petersburg. So there was negotiations what should happen, and then the deal was that what was put they built a small room in the exhibition with a curtain,
okay.
and where that series was. Well, guess what happened? Was the best seen part of the exhibition because everybody.
And has it led to something constructive as well, you think?
Sorry?
Has it led to something constructive as well to showcase these more controversial issues in countries like that?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to measure, but I mean, it first of all speaks about freedom of the press, obviously.
Yeah.
And that censorship is not acceptable. But that's easy to be said, but it's sometimes complicated. But I think most of the cases they are showing. Huh? I mean, it happens rarely that they have to take it down. I mean, it hasn't been in Pyongyang yet, I think.
In Pyongyang?
Yeah.
In North Korea?
Yeah.
Is that the most challenging country?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Are there any questions already in the audience about World Press, for example? Not at the moment. And I think it's nice to move on to your...
We
better, yeah, because we don't have that much time. So this year your book, After Us, the Deluge, came out. Na ons de zondvloed.
Yeah.
In which you covered the human consequences of rising sea levels. Yeah, maybe first of all, what brought you into making this project?
As I said, I mean, my focus for maybe the last 15 years has been more on environmental, climate-related stories, which often, I mean, there is a connection with the conflicts that I covered, because I often saw that the changing climate is a source of conflict. If there's lack of water, drought, famines, which are related to the climate crisis, that creates conflicts. So this story I actually... I mean, I came across while working on another story. I was working on a story about contemporary migration in the Americas, and I was traveling from the very south of Chile, Patagonia, to the very north of Alaska, overland.
That's quite a distance.
It was 40,000 kilometers on buses in the end, because I wanted to travel local, because I want to understand what it means for people to leave their home and their family if they're migrating.
Okay.
So, well, to keep it short, halfway I came to Panama. I came to this beautiful group of islands on the Caribbean side. They're called the San Blas Islands, Cunayala actually, and I was interviewing people there, and they said that they would be evacuated. And I didn't really understand what they meant, so I said, why are you being evacuated? And they said, the sea is coming.
Okay.
And that was kind of the first time that I realized that the consequences of the sea level, although it might not seems to be significant at the moment, that this is affecting millions of people in the world already. So I thought if it's happening there, it must be happening somewhere else as well. So that was basically the start of this story, where I researched different parts of the world where there's an urgency and where people are affected already.
Okay, because you also have, it seems, a long-term fascination about water in general. Yeah, if you want, we're going to be looking at some images as well from your book.
Yeah, you will look at different regions in the world. It starts with Greenland, which is obviously, until recently, actually, the main reason why the sea level was rising was because the oceans were warming up. And as you probably know, if water gets hotter, it expands. So that was the main reason for the sea level rise. But that's been taken over now for the last couple of years by the melting of the ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland. So Greenland is a big source, is one of the main issues. There's a lot of ice on Greenland. There's about 2.53 kilometers of ice on Greenland. Mm-hmm. So if that all would melt, the sea level will rise 7 meters. But if Antarctica would melt, it would rise 86 meters. Don't worry, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, but a meter in many, many regions in the world is already very problematic. And, you know, I mean, we just saw what was happening in Glasgow at the climate summit, which I don't think was the desired outcome. And I think that people often forget that the emissions that are already in the sky, they don't disappear. You know, I mean, the whole idea is that we have to cut emissions as soon as possible to prevent worse. But we are now on track. We are now already 1.1 degrees heating up. We are on track for 2.7. Just 1 degree Celsius, which we already passed, means 2.3 meters sea level rise. Mm-hmm. So this 2.3 meters is coming anyway. The question is when. But if we behave like we are behaving, this is going to be the end of the century, which is, I don't know if, well, maybe no one will be here, but if you are getting children, they will definitely be. And that's alarming. It's more than alarming. Yeah. So because, you know, I mean, Bangladesh, which is a delta just like the Netherlands, the only difference is that we are better protected. But there millions of people have left the delta already. And I assumed also that that the problem started when the water was coming into the room permanently, but it starts much earlier. And the reason for that is that often when land floods and the water doesn't recede anymore, it means that the soil gets saline and people can't grow crops anymore. There's no safe drinking water anymore. Well, if you can't grow your food and there's no safe drinking water, then it's time to leave. Mm-hmm. And obviously we measure differently, right? I mean, there's lots of places in the world where people, like we will see the Pacific. If we would have been living there today, we would have been evacuated a long time ago. So we measure differently of what we consider.
You mean us being the wealthy West, so to say, or?
Yeah, no, you know, I mean what we consider to be safe.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean it's definitely unsafe there. It's very risky. But we'll speak about it when we're there.
Okay, yeah. So getting back to the start of your project, so you were doing the migration project, and you realized this is an issue. This was back in I think
2011.
2011, okay.
Yeah.
So not that much attention yet, perhaps, for the issues we know it now?
No, I remember that I was speaking to colleagues and friends and saying that I was working on this story, and most people, they glazed at me. What is this guy talking about? Yeah. And that, I think, has changed in the last 10 years. I think everybody is aware that first of all, there is something seriously wrong with the climate. You know, in the beginning we thought, okay, it's not so bad to have warm weather in the Netherlands, but when we had 2 summers when in Amsterdam it was exceeding 40 degrees, it became not so funny anymore. And I think everybody is aware that the sea level will rise. The thing is that there's a tipping point, you know, the predictions are, and unfortunately all scientific predictions have been correct so far, is that there's going to be a tipping point in 10, 15 years when there will be a very steep rise in the sea level. Okay.
But this is, how do you go about starting such a project? You mentioned you do a lot of research.
Yeah.
You speak to scientists. How do you scout the locations?
I'm a freelancer, so I've never been staff or contract or so. Usually, all the stories I work on, they are my own initiative, and then I have to try to sell them. In this case, I was fairly lucky because at the very early stage, the New York Times stepped in. Okay. So the initial part of the story I did for the New York Times. Which is obviously, it's a great newspaper to work for, first of all, because the work I do it because I want people to see it. And if you work for the New York Times, it gets seen by 40 million people in the paper itself, and then obviously online. And it's been seen by policymakers and politicians. Yes. So you hopefully have some impact And it was, you know, I mean, it was sometimes difficult to work for them because they're very strict in their verification. So, you know, if I would claim something in my captions or in my text, I had to show them at least 2 verifiable sources where I got this from. So forget about copy-paste Wikipedia. That was not acceptable. So, you know, that made it sometimes difficult, but it made it very thorough.
Yeah, so in that sense, because I also asked because
These are these islands in Panama. Those images are from 2011.
Okay, so from their first location. So
and I discovered quite early that I thought quite early that it would be good to have like aerials, because often from the air you saw much better what the impact that the sea had on the land, what erosion would do. So initially, you know, when I started, there were drones already on the market, but they were super big and very expensive. So initially, I had a kite.
A kite. This is a kite photo.
This is a kite picture.
Okay.
So somebody helped me to build like a camera rig. I had a small Nikon camera, so so I would, and then I couldn't see what I was doing, but I could program the camera that it would take a picture every 2 seconds, and then I would determine the angle with the wind, and then hopefully I would get the right image. So, yeah, if you look very well, I don't know if you can see it. You see a small white line in the top corner, in the top on the left. That's the kite line, and then you see me standing there.
You didn't Photoshop that out, or
no, it's there.
Yeah.
If you switch off the lights, you see it. So and then later I started using a drone when they became cheaper and smaller.
Yeah. But how is it as a journalist to be finding yourself in this arena about the climate change debate? Because of course that's quite a heated discussion in every sense of the word. But
I mean, you know, I must say that I use social media, but I stopped following comments on or tweets on if I post anything, because it gets very nasty sometimes and quite incredible. You know, I mean, maybe some of you. I was a couple of months ago. I was at Buitenhof, which is the news program talk show on Sunday in the Netherlands. And I was interviewed there about the book and the project, and then the guest after me was Thierry Baudet. So after that show, I got death threats.
You got death threats?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, because obviously he had to respond to my work, and he said it was all a lie, and there was no climate crisis, and everything is fine. So obviously we had very opposite views on the whole matter.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you know, I mean, it's the whole landscape.
There you were taking less risk in your work, and then you end up getting death threats for environmental issues.
Yeah, quite incredible, no?
Yeah. And in what sense? What is?
So this is the Pacific, by the way. So this is the country called Kiribati. If anyone knows it, I'll buy you a coffee. Where it is? Lucky me.
Tell us.
You all know it actually. It's the country in the world which always reaches the new year first, because they are exactly on the date line. So they were the country to celebrate the millennium change as first. It's located between Fiji and Hawaii, like really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's the furthest I ever traveled, and the furthest you can travel probably from the Netherlands. It's an island state, so it's a nation. It's as big as India, actually. The only difference is that it consists mostly of ocean. But there's about 100,000 people living there, and as you can see, it's very serious already. I mean, this is a normal high tide. So the coral reefs have died because of the heating of the ocean. The beaches have eroded. The land is about maximum 1.5 meters above sea level. So they are one of the first nations to go. And we all speak about climate refugees, but it has never happened in the world that someone received asylum because of the climate crisis. It almost happened. There was a family from this country who asked for asylum in New Zealand. It was granted, and then it was overruled by the Supreme Court, and they were sent back.
Okay.
So the question is actually what we're going to do with countries that disappear. Where do you put the people? What happens to the language? What happens to the culture? So we can talk about a refugee crisis now, but I think the numbers we will see in the future are from a completely different level.
And how do you visualize those problems in your photos? What's your approach there?
Well, I think what was interesting, what I discovered quite early, normally as a photographer, you think about the light, you think about all the, you obviously you know that early in the morning and later in the afternoon, the light is the best. But for this project, I discovered very quickly that it was more, my guide on these strips was a tide table. So
tight, okay, yeah.
A tide table. So, I was planning my trips that I would be at the different locations at high tide or even spring tide, which happens once or twice a month. Because if you show what happens already at high tide, you can imagine what it means if you add another 1, 2, 3 meters. So that was a very crucial lesson in the beginning, that I had to change the way I was working normally.
Yeah, because what part of your work is actually the photo, and how much is it the story that you make with it?
I mean, the actual time that I spent shooting is a fraction of the time I spent on research.
Yeah, okay, because that's surprising to me, as you being a photojournalist.
Yeah. Well, everybody has a different approach,
right.
But I think if you're working on such a, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I know a lot about it, which is great, right? I mean, that's great if it's great about my work that you gain so much knowledge, and it's difficult stories, obviously, because I mean the big question was how do you visualize something which is often not visual yet. If we talk about the climate and what will happen, we often talk about the future. So that was the big challenge.
Yeah, so it was making it less abstract, I guess.
Yeah, and that it has an impact, I mean, and I think I consider this now to be visual proof, so if people like Baudet want to deny it, it's, well, whatever, right? I mean, it's there.
Harder to deny pictures, I would say, than data.
Yeah, I mean, it's there, right? I mean, it's there. The guy is there, right? I didn't put him there. I didn't Photoshop him there.
This is a very interesting one. Yeah.
It's Miami, which was really interesting because Miami has a very specific problem, as some might know, which is that the city is built on limestone. It's great to build on. There's one problem. If you build a dike or a seawall on limestone, the limestone is porous. So all the Dutch experts have come to Miami to see if there's a possibility to save that city. Because if you put this seawall, the water will just go under it because it's porous. So it had to be concluded that Miami cannot be saved.
Okay.
So this is high tide in Miami Beach. So the water gets already that high that it comes up through the sewage.
And he is standing in the sewage, I presume, or or he's just really small.
As we would say it we would say man in the put in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Literally.
So I asked him what he was doing there, and he said, "I'm checking if the sewage is not blocked."
Okay.
And then he did like this, and he said, "No, seawater."
Okay. Wow.
That was proof.
Yeah. I see we're already running out of time. Are there any short questions for the audience? If you like. Maybe you can also, there's a catch box coming to you. If you can catch it and speak in the black part at the top, please.
Nice, thanks. Thanks a lot for the interesting words. What I'm really curious about is that I think that as you said, what you're showing is very much proof of what some people are still neglecting to be true. Through doing all this research and going to these places, but at the same time, I suppose also seeing solutions that are currently developed around the world. Is your sentiment more negative or positive towards, I guess, the way in which most people are now picturing the future? Do you think that the solutions that you see on your research and your travels is something to be optimistic about, or are you mainly pessimistic for what's to come?
I mean, it's optimistic for some parts of the world, but you know, I mean, I was born in 1963 in the Netherlands, we had a very big disaster in 1953 in the Netherlands, which was a huge flood where almost 1,900 people got killed. So then we took action. We took action by closing off the sea arms in the southwest of the Netherlands. The dikes were heightened. So we were prepared for the future. But what we did back in that day is okay till 1 meter sea level rise. Anything above it, it's not okay anymore. And this to do this in the Netherlands took 40 years. So
40 years to build protection. Okay.
So, and we were already well protected. Pretty well protected. If you look at the American East Coast, if you look at many places in the world, there's nothing. So I think that people forget that the clock is ticking and that it takes time to protect. And that's what makes me really worried, is that we still act as if we have enough time. And we believe that technology will save us. To some extent it will, but otherwise, you know, there are other options, and don't get me wrong, I mean, the sea level has been much higher in the past, and it has been much lower in the past. I mean, there was a tundra between England and the Netherlands, you know, the mammoths were there. Those changes took hundreds or thousands of years, and what we see now is 2 generations, and that's the big difference. And we lost, in many parts of the world, including this part of the world, we lost our ability to adapt.
I read somewhere that you live on a boat. Is that already a deliberate decision?
I like to tell you that it was that I was a visionary. No, before I was a photographer, I was a sailor.
Okay.
So my dream was always to live on a sailing ship. So.
But it might come in handy in the future.
It might come in handy. It might suddenly get busy.
In the blackest scenario there.
So yeah, the Arch of Kadir.
Yeah. Kadir, we have to wrap it up. My final question to you: is this project finished for you now, or is it something you're going to continue working on?
It's very difficult to start with a project, but it's more difficult to finish it. So right. I finished it already in 2015, but then I made a television series for Dutch public television, so that's how it got revived. So I think now it's closed, but now I'm doing for the province of North Holland, I'm doing a documentary how that part of the Netherlands is living with the water. So okay. I guess it will not disappear. And, you know, I mean, it's only getting more urgent, so... And maybe I was thinking, you know, maybe to train a very young photographer who's maybe like 17 or 18 now, so that he or she can go back to those regions in 40 years, document the same places, and then you will see. Okay. Well, let's hope that there's not that much change, but that's in a hopeful scenario, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, there are wild plans for the Netherlands, huh? But I think if we continue this way, the most realistic one is relocation. Okay. So, you know, I mean, which means that Amsterdam and The Hague and Rotterdam and other cities need to be. It's going to be busy in Eindhoven, I think, in that scenario. Yeah. I forgot to check what the altitude is of Eindhoven. I think we're good. Yeah. 1 meter above. That's a bit problematic. Still, okay. We have to. Germany. Germany. Are you speaking German? You better learn it.
Let's hope this is speculation and not
yeah,
reality.
that's it's
Final
a
comment?
geologist who made this map. This is supposed to be the Netherlands in 20,300, so that's quite a long time, but not in the history of this planet. So, no, Eindhoven is at the coast. It's going to be a beach town.
Okay, I'm happy we can still end on a positive note in that sense.
Yeah,
Kadir. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your work. Kadir van Lohuizen. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your time. And we hope to see you at the World Press Exposition, which starts next week. And we'll be here for about 3 weeks in the Atlas building. See you next time.